The year was 1942. Far from the industrial cities of America, thousands of miles across the Pacific, war had transformed humid island jungles into labyrinths of fear. Vines hung like snares, the air shimmered with heat, and visibility collapsed into a wall of green after only a few steps. It was a place where modern technology met primordial wilderness, a battlefield unlike anything either side had truly prepared for. For the Japanese Imperial Army, this terrain was an opportunity. Their military doctrine, shaped through decades of preparation, emphasized discipline, stealth, and the spiritual force of the soldier. Close quarters infiltration under the cover of darkness was their signature tactic. In the choking jungle, rifles became cumbersome, artillery unreliable, and visibility so poor that engagements often began at less than 30 yards, sometimes closer than a man could throw a grenade. Here, they believed, their night assaults and bayonet charges would overwhelm even the best-equipped foe. The United States Marines saw the same jungle, but through different eyes. Intelligence officers understood that the dense foliage nullified many conventional advantages. In these conditions, firepower needed to be sudden, wide, and decisive. And so, quietly, they introduced a weapon few in the Japanese ranks had ever trained against, a tool more commonly associated with duck hunts than frontline combat, the 12-gauge pump-action shotgun. When those weapons arrived on the islands, Winchester Model 1897S and Model 1912S, they carried no fanfare. There were no triumphant announcements, no propaganda posters, but their impact in close jungle fighting was immediate and visceral. At the ranges where Japanese soldiers expected their bayonets to rule, a single Marine could unleash a storm of buckshot in seconds. 9 heavy pellets spread in a lethal fan, tearing through foliage and flesh alike. The jungle's concealment, which had shielded infiltrators for years, suddenly became a trap. Japanese tactical manuals had anticipated British rifles, American machine guns, even Soviet submachine guns, but nowhere did they account for this. Shotguns were dismissed as civilian curiosities, hardly worth a line of doctrine. In that oversight lay the seed of surprise. Night patrols became more dangerous. Infiltration routes that once promised silent approaches turned deadly as Marines stationed shotgun-wielding sentries at likely paths. The distinctive cha-chunk of a pump being cycled in the dark became both warning and omen. To the attackers, it was the sound of plans unraveling. To the defenders, a reassurance that in the claustrophobic night they held the advantage. This was the Pacific War's hidden twist. A weapon forged for farms and hunting grounds found unexpected power in some of the fiercest jungle battles in history. And for the Japanese infantry, trained, disciplined, but doctrinally unprepared, the encounter would be as shocking as it was deadly. For the Japanese Imperial Army, war in the Pacific wasn't merely a contest of weapons. It was a struggle of willpower, discipline, and spiritual supremacy. Their doctrine rested on a conviction, forged through years of imperial expansion. A soldier's moral strength could overcome any material shortfall. Manuals emphasized seishin, the fighting spirit, above all else. A Japanese infantryman was trained to believe that courage, properly directed, could break the enemy's technological edge. This belief was not mere bravado. Japan's leadership understood their strategic disadvantage with painful clarity. In a single year, American steel mills produced more metal than Japan could in 4. Aircraft factories in California outpaced entire Japanese industrial regions. Naval shipyards turned out carriers and destroyers with assembly line speed. Against such overwhelming capacity, Japan chose not to match machine for machine, but to create soldiers who could exploit terrain and darkness to nullify that imbalance. The Imperial Army perfected the night infiltration attack. Under the cover of darkness, small units would snake through the jungle, slipping past barbed wire and sentries to strike suddenly and brutally at close range. Once inside enemy positions, they relied on bayonet charges, grenades, and sheer momentum to collapse defensive lines. Against poorly trained or static defenders, these tactics were devastating. China, Malaya, and the Philippines had all witnessed Allied forces buckle under their precision and ferocity. Their opponents, the United States, approached war from the opposite end of the spectrum. America didn't glorify spiritual purity. It glorified production lines. Its doctrine evolved around logistics, firepower, and the ability to overwhelm through sheer volume of force. The Marine Corps trained to combine artillery, machine guns, naval bombardment, and infantry maneuvers into a single crushing system. Each element reinforced the other. Where Japanese infantry depended on the individual warrior, Americans relied on the coordinated might of an industrial giant. In theory, these contrasting philosophies shouldn't have collided evenly in the jungle. The Japanese had tailored their tactics to thrive in terrain that seemed to neutralize America's long-range firepower. But the reality of the Pacific Islands told a different story. What happens when a force built on infiltration meets defenders equipped with devastating short-range weapons? This was the tension simmering beneath every night raid and patrol. Japanese commanders believed that their soldiers, hardened by training and guided by doctrine, could shatter marine lines once they closed the distance. They envisioned rifles and bayonets carving through confused defenders. What they encountered instead were Marines armed with weapons that turned those close approaches into killing grounds. A single shotgun could fire 6 shells of buckshot in mere seconds. 9 pellets per shot meant dozens of lethal projectiles fanning out through the foliage before the infiltrators even saw their targets. The Japanese advantage in hand-to-hand combat was suddenly irrelevant when they couldn't reach their enemies alive. Their tactics, once terrifying, began to falter against this combination of firepower and preparation. What makes this clash particularly striking is that neither side underestimated the other's courage. Japanese soldiers were undeniably brave, often advancing through impossible conditions. Marines respected that ferocity, but courage alone couldn't overcome a tactical blind spot. The Japanese doctrine had meticulously studied British Lee, Enfields, American Brownings, French mortars, even Soviet submachine guns. But shotguns, those were dismissed as tools of hunters, not warriors. That single assumption would echo through countless nighttime encounters. This was the Pacific War in miniature, an empire betting on spirit, confronting a nation betting on steel. In the humid darkness of the Pacific jungles, those two philosophies didn't just clash, they collided violently, rewriting expectations on both sides. Before these weapons earned their grim reputation in the jungles of the Pacific, they were built for a far simpler purpose: hunting. The Winchester Model 1897, designed by the legendary John Browning, rolled off factory lines decades before the Pacific War. It was rugged, reliable, and brutally straightforward, a pump-action shotgun that could deliver devastating firepower in close quarters. What set it apart was not elegance, but speed. Its lack of a trigger disconnector meant a Marine could hold the trigger down and simply pump the action, unleashing round after round in a blur. This feature, known as slam fire, turned the humble shotgun into something frighteningly close to a handheld automatic scattergun. The military adapted the Model 97 for war. The barrel was shortened to 20 inches for maneuverability. A perforated heat shield kept hands safe during sustained fire, and a bayonet lug allowed it to mount the long M1917 sword bayonet. It was an unusual hybrid, part hunting tool, part trench weapon, part spear. In the claustrophobic jungles, this hybridization made sense. Every inch of mobility mattered, and the ability to combine a devastating blast with a fixed bayonet gave Marines flexible options in unpredictable encounters. Not long after, another Winchester model joined the ranks, the Model 1912, engineered by T.C. Johnson. It refined Browning's design by replacing the external hammer with an internal mechanism, improving safety and durability in the field. By 1943, the Model 12 was becoming the primary shotgun in Marine units, though both models served side by side throughout the war. Marines quickly developed personal preferences. Some swore by the raw, aggressive feel of the 97, others trusted the slick reliability of the 12. In the mud and chaos of Pacific Islands, both could deliver terrifying results at close range. Yet the true lethality of these shotguns came not just from their engineering, but from the ammunition they fired. The standard load was 12-gauge 0.00 buckshot, each shell holding 9 lead pellets, each nearly .33 caliber, larger than many handgun bullets. When fired, those pellets fanned out into a deadly spread. At 10 yards, the pattern expanded to about 10 inches. At 20 yards, roughly 20 by 30 yards, a full 30 inches wide. In the tangled vegetation of Pacific jungles, where a soldier often saw movement rather than a clear target, this pattern turned a single shot into a sweeping wall of destruction. For Japanese infiltrators trained to exploit the cover of darkness and foliage, this was catastrophic. A single Marine crouched behind a tree line with a shotgun could sweep a narrow jungle trail with almost guaranteed hits. Even if his aim was slightly off, the spread ensured deadly coverage. Against an enemy accustomed to rifles, this kind of firepower at close range felt almost unfair. Behind these numbers lay deliberate tactical thinking. The Marines weren't trying to outgun the Japanese at long distances. They were reshaping the close-range battlefield. Patrol point men often carried shotguns for this exact reason. If ambushed, they could deliver an immediate, overwhelming counterblast, buying their units seconds to react. Perimeter defenses placed shotgun wielders at likely infiltration points. At night, one sudden blast could turn a silent approach into panic and retreat. The Marines brought these shotguns in considerable numbers. By the war's end, approximately 25,000 Model 97S and 60,000, 80,000 Model 12S had entered service. These weren't ornamental additions. They represented a conscious adaptation to a unique environment. Conventional rifles, like the M1 Garand, excelled in open terrain, but in the jungles, where visibility collapsed into green walls and ambushes came from whisper close range, shotguns offered something no other weapon could match: instant, wide-area lethality. It's easy to underestimate these weapons by modern standards. Today, they're often relegated to breaching doors or specialized roles. But in the Pacific theater, the shotgun was an equalizer, a way for a single Marine to dominate the few yards of jungle that mattered most. Each clack of the pump echoed both technological ingenuity and battlefield pragmatism. In the hands of determined young Marines, these shotguns transformed from hunting tools into instruments of tactical disruption. They weren't glamorous, but when the jungle closed in and the night came alive with movement, few sounds were as decisive or as terrifying as the roar of a 12-gauge in the dark. When U.S. Marines stepped onto the beaches of Guadalcanal in August 1942, few fully grasped what awaited them inland. The island's interior was a tangled, suffocating jungle, a place where heat soaked through uniforms, insects swarmed in endless waves, and visibility often vanished beyond a few meters. Paths dissolved into vines, streams cut through thick undergrowth, and the air itself felt heavy, almost alive. In this alien landscape, the shotgun began its quiet debut. The Marines of the 1st Division carried a mixture of weapons: MiA 1903 Springfields, M1 Garands, Browning machine guns, and a scattering of Winchester shotguns. There was no grand tactical doctrine for their use. Many had been brought simply because someone understood instinctively that close-range firepower might matter here. Their presence in official reports was minimal, but in the hands of patrol point men and perimeter guards, these weapons would soon earn a reputation. The Japanese landing forces, hardened veterans of earlier campaigns, saw Guadalcanal as a proving ground. Colonel Kayonao Ichiki, commanding a detachment of nearly 1,000 men, believed he could crush the Marine positions through night infiltration and frontal assault. His troops were trained for exactly this environment: stealthy approaches, sudden close combat, and bayonet charges designed to sow panic. On the night of August 21st, 1942, they attacked across the Tenaru River, often misnamed the Battle of the Tenaru, though technically Alligator Creek. The clash that followed was brutal. As darkness fell, Japanese soldiers advanced through the jungle, slipping toward the Marine defensive lines. They expected confused rifle fire and scattered resistance. What they encountered instead was a wall of coordinated firepower: machine guns, canister-firing 37mm anti-tank guns, and in scattered positions along the line, Marines with shotguns. In those tight infiltration routes, shotguns proved devastating. A single blast of 0.00 buckshot at 20 yards could shred through multiple attackers advancing in tight columns along narrow trails. Japanese soldiers trained to rely on surprise suddenly found themselves torn apart before they even reached striking distance. Patrols later reported that infiltrators were sometimes caught at point-blank range, their attacks collapsing in seconds under concentrated close-range fire. Yet these early encounters also revealed the weapon's limitations. The Pacific was merciless to equipment. Standard paper-hulled shotgun shells, perfectly functional in the dry conditions of Camp Pendleton, began to swell and warp in Guadalcanal's tropical humidity. Marines discovered to their frustration that shells that chambered smoothly during inspection could become stuck or unusable after a night in the jungle. Some reported hammering swollen shells into chambers, a deadly delay during combat. The effectiveness of the shotgun was not just a matter of tactics, but also of logistics and environment. And in 1942, the environment often won. Throughout the Guadalcanal campaign, which stretched into early 1943, shotguns found their niche roles. Perimeter defense became one of the most important. At night, when Japanese infiltrators crept forward, Marines placed shotgun-armed sentries at likely approach points. A single blast could halt a probing attack or expose an infiltration team. During jungle patrols, the point man, the most dangerous position, often carried a shotgun. His job was not to pick off enemies at range, but to react instantly if ambushed. In these moments, the weapon's spread and stopping power could mean the difference between life and death. However, official after-action reports from Guadalcanal rarely mentioned shotguns. Machine guns, artillery, and rifles dominated the documented narratives. The Marines themselves spoke of the intense heat, the endless rain, and the enemy's persistence. Shotguns, though undeniably present, operated in the background, essential in specific moments, invisible in strategic summaries. Photographs from the period tell a different story. In grainy black and white images, patrol leaders can be seen gripping Winchester shotguns, eyes scanning the green walls ahead. These were the men tasked with walking into the unknown first. The shotgun was their insurance policy. In the claustrophobic jungle, the sound of the pump cycling was as much a comfort to fellow Marines as it was a warning to hidden enemies. Guadalcanal became a testing ground, not just for the Marines' resolve, but for their weapons. The early months exposed the challenges of adapting peacetime equipment to one of the harshest combat environments on Earth. Some Marines swore by their shotguns after close calls, others cursed them when ammunition swelled beyond use. It was a weapon that could be either a savior or a liability, depending on the weather and the moment. As the campaign dragged on, one truth became clear: shotguns excelled in very specific scenarios, but could not be relied upon as universal solutions. Against night infiltrations and jungle ambushes, they were devastating. Against logistical challenges and the elements, they struggled. This duality would define their role throughout the Pacific War. a weapon of opportunity rather than strategy. In the jungles of the Pacific, the enemy wasn't only flesh and blood, it was the air itself, humid, heavy, and relentless. Weapons rusted overnight. Boots rotted within weeks. Ammunition, carefully packed and shipped from temperate American factories, met a tropical climate that seemed purpose-built to sabotage it. For the Marine Corps' combat shotguns, this environmental hostility struck at their most critical vulnerability, the shells. During the early campaigns, the standard 12-gauge ammunition issued to Marines used paper hulls, the same kind found in civilian hunting stores back home. These cartridges performed perfectly on firing ranges in California and the Carolinas. But under the 100% humidity of Guadalcanal, New Guinea, and other islands, they began to absorb moisture like sponges. Overnight, shells could swell just enough to refuse entry into a shotgun's chamber. What had been a smooth, rapid slamfire on the training field became a jam at the worst possible moment. Reports from the front lines were grim. Marines described situations where swollen shells had to be hammered into chambers during engagements, a near-suicidal delay when Japanese infiltrators were meters away in the dark. Others found that their first few shells worked, only to discover the rest in their pouches had swollen beyond use by morning. In some instances, Marines quietly set shotguns aside in favor of rifles, not because the weapon had failed mechanically, but because ammunition reliability had evaporated in the jungle air. This was not a small issue, it was a strategic setback. A weapon designed for decisive close-range engagements was rendered unreliable by weather. Commanders noted that shotgun use fluctuated with the climate. After heavy rains, usage dropped sharply. In brief dry spells, it increased again. It was as though the weapon had to fight the jungle itself before it could fight the enemy. The solution arrived painfully late. On March 29, 1945, the U.S. military officially adopted the M19 all-brass 12-gauge shell. Unlike the paper versions, these brass casings were effectively waterproof, impervious to the swelling that plagued earlier ammunition. They restored the shotgun's reliability just as the Pacific Campaign was entering its final brutal stages. Okinawa, Iwo Jima, and the preparations for the planned invasion of Japan. But by then, years of operational experience had already shaped Marine tactics around the shotgun's unreliability. Its moment of full potential had passed. The irony was bitter. A simple material choice, paper versus brass, had limited the tactical impact of thousands of shotguns for nearly 3 years. Marines who might have relied on them more extensively often didn't, scarred by earlier failures. Post-war veterans would later recall the weapon fondly in specific situations, but they never forgot the frustration of ammunition that turned to mush in their hands. In the end, the moisture war was a quiet but decisive factor in shaping how shotguns were used. Not through enemy action, but through environmental reality. In a theater defined by mud, rain, and jungle, even the mightiest industrial power had to bow to nature's persistent grip. Back in the United States, thousands of miles from the sweltering jungles of the Pacific, Marine recruits drilled with shotguns on clean, dry ranges. The manuals were clear, the procedures rehearsed, and the scenarios neatly defined. The U.S. military had formalized its shotgun doctrine with Technical Manual TM 990-285, published in September 1942. This manual didn't just describe how to operate a Winchester, it outlined a philosophy of use: perimeter defense, jungle patrols, cave clearing, night engagements, and prisoner control. Shotguns were not afterthoughts. They were officially recognized as specialized combat tools. Training emphasized speed and decisiveness. Recruits learned the slamfire technique, holding down the trigger and cycling the pump rapidly to unleash devastating bursts in seconds. They practiced point defense under simulated night attacks, learned to clear bunkers with swift, close-range blasts, and drilled on rapid ammunition reloading. Instructors cautioned against overusing slamfire to avoid overheating barrels and wasting ammunition, but they also knew that in the right moment, the technique could stop an enemy charge cold. At Camp Pendleton, Camp Lejeune, and Paris Island, Marines were told that the shotgun, properly used, was a force multiplier in tight spaces. Allocation reflected this doctrine. According to the Marine Corps Table of Organization E-100, effective from 1943, each Marine division was authorized 306 shotguns. They weren't evenly distributed. Military police units received many for prisoner handling and rear area security. Pioneer battalions carried them for specialized tasks, and select rifle squads were assigned shotguns for jungle patrol and defensive duties. On paper, every major Marine operation had a defined shotgun presence. But doctrine has a way of unraveling in the face of reality. Once deployed to the Pacific Islands, those neatly printed manuals met mud, rain, fear, and improvisation. Shotgun tactics evolved not from policy memos but from the immediate, brutal demands of survival. Units adapted on the fly. In some squads, the designated shotgunner became the point man, leading patrols through narrow jungle trails where ambushes were most likely. His role was as dangerous as it was crucial: detect danger first, and if the enemy struck, respond faster than they could. The shotgun's spread pattern made it ideal for this role. A burst of 000 buckshot could suppress an ambush instantly, tearing through vegetation and forcing attackers to duck before they fully revealed themselves. This gave the rest of the patrol precious seconds to deploy and return fire. But it required intense trust within the squad. The shotgunner often moved several paces ahead, dangerously exposed, counting on his comrades to cover him if things went wrong. Night perimeter defense was another area where doctrine and practice aligned closely. Marines placed shotgun-armed sentries at likely infiltration routes, gaps in wire, narrow jungle trails, or stream crossings. These positions were deliberately chosen to maximize the weapon's devastating short-range power. In the pitch-black darkness, where visibility collapsed to mere feet, the sound of a pump-action cycling was both a psychological warning and a deadly prelude. For Japanese infiltrators, trained to rely on stealth, the shotgun became an unexpected nightmare lurking in the dark. However, other doctrinal applications didn't survive contact with reality so well. Cave and bunker clearing, for instance, theoretically played to the shotgun's strengths, but in practice, flamethrowers and explosives proved far more effective and safer. Marines discovered quickly that shotgun blasts couldn't always penetrate deep defensive positions, and attackers risked walking into deadly traps. Shotguns remained useful in tight, immediate engagements, but they were not the decisive bunker-busting weapons doctrine once envisioned. Logistical issues also shaped real-world use. Ammunition was heavy and bulky, each 12-gauge shell weighing roughly twice as much as a rifle round and taking up 3 times the space. This limited how much a Marine could carry into combat. Supply chains prioritized rifle and machine gun ammunition, leaving shotgun shells lower on the manifest. Many shotgun users received only a few boxes of shells per operation, forcing them to ration their firepower carefully. As campaigns progressed, these realities led many frontline units to treat shotguns as situational assets rather than core weapons. Some squads loved them, adapting tactics around their close-range dominance. Others left them behind entirely, favoring the versatility of rifles and submachine guns. Doctrine said one thing. Field experience often said another. This evolving relationship between training, allocation, and actual combat use is telling. The Marine Corps had correctly identified shotguns as valuable in specific scenarios, but in war, specificity can be both a strength and a limitation. Where conditions aligned, they were devastating. Where they didn't, they became dead weight. Marines adapted accordingly, not out of theory, but necessity. By mid-war, the shotgun's place in the Marine arsenal had stabilized, not as a frontline star, but as a reliable specialist for patrol point men, perimeter defenders, and prisoner guards. It remained invaluable. For large-scale assaults or sustained engagements, other weapons took the lead. Doctrine had provided the blueprint, but the jungle rewrote the story. If one were to judge solely by popular imagery, it might seem as though American Marines stormed every Pacific island, shotguns blazing, scattering Japanese forces in every thicket and cave. Decades of films, documentaries, and video games have cemented this image, the shotgun as a kind of jungle king, the ultimate close-range equalizer. Yet when historians sift through the actual records, a more complex and often quieter story emerges. One of the most striking findings in the historical record is what isn't there. Japanese military archives, captured during and after the war, contain extensive studies of American weapons and tactics. Their analysts meticulously documented everything from naval bombardments to machine gun positions and flamethrower strategies. They issued tactical directives on how to counter artillery barrages, avoid naval gunfire, and blunt tank infantry advances. But shotguns, they are almost entirely absent from these analyses. During World War I, Germany had protested the U.S. Army's use of trench shotguns, claiming they violated the Hague Convention and caused unnecessary suffering. In sharp contrast, the Japanese Empire lodged no formal diplomatic protests regarding American shotguns in World War II. This silence isn't because they didn't encounter them. They certainly did. It's because, in the grand calculus of the battlefield, shotguns never reached the level of strategic importance that would demand special countermeasures. Post-war interrogations of Japanese officers reinforce this absence. Many spoke at length about American artillery superiority, the devastating coordination of naval gunfire, and the relentless combined arms pressure that ground down their defenses. None singled out shotguns as particularly problematic. To them, the overwhelming danger came from bombardment and coordinated infantry assaults, not from scattered close-range encounters with Marines carrying pump actions. American records tell a similar story. While procurement figures show tens of thousands of shotguns produced and distributed, combat reports rarely highlight them. Detailed operational research teams compiled statistics on artillery effectiveness, mortar hit probabilities, and rifle fire expenditure. They produced thick studies correlating weapon usage to casualty figures. But when it comes to shotguns, statistical data is almost non-existent. No reliable numbers exist showing enemy casualties inflicted by shotgun fire or their tactical impact on a large scale. Even veteran interviews revealed this gap. The Library of Congress Veterans History Project and the National Museum of the Pacific War together hold thousands of oral histories from Marines and soldiers who fought in the Pacific. These accounts are often vivid, emotional, and rich with tactical detail. And yet, references to shotgun combat are rare. When they do appear, they are usually brief, describing shotguns as useful in specific roles, jungle ambushes, night perimeter defense, or as point man weapons during patrols. Few veterans speak of them as decisive game changers. Consider Eugene Sledge, whose memoir, With the Old Breed, is widely regarded as one of the most authentic and harrowing accounts of the Pacific War. Despite serving in intense battles at Peleliu and Okinawa, he never once mentions shotguns. Robert Leckie's Helmet for My Pillow, another first-hand classic, similarly omits them, despite detailed descriptions of jungle warfare and night engagements. These are not oversights, they reflect reality. For many Marines, shotguns were on the periphery of their daily combat experience. The absence of statistical and narrative weight does not mean the weapon was useless. Far from it. Shotguns proved highly effective in narrow scenarios, ambush responses, infiltration defense, and prisoner control. But they never shaped the broader tactical or operational outcomes of the Pacific Campaign. They were specialists, not stars. Why then? Did myths grow so large? Part of the answer lies in the weapon's dramatic visual and auditory presence. The sight of a Marine cycling a pump-action shotgun, the cha-chunk echoing through jungle night, is inherently cinematic. A close-range blast of buckshot delivers visceral impact that rifles and machine guns, though deadlier in aggregate, don't replicate moment by moment. These qualities made the shotgun a natural candidate for storytelling exaggeration, both during the war in unit folklore and long after in films and popular culture. Another factor is retrospective simplification. History, especially popular history, often gravitates toward clear symbols, the M1 Garand as the rifle that won the war, the Sherman tank as the armored workhorse, the flamethrower as the bunker buster. The shotgun, with its iconic shape and recognizable action, fits neatly into this symbolic structure, even if reality didn't match the drama. Over time, anecdotes hardened into narratives, and narratives became myths. Yet the archival silence remains stubborn. Shotguns represented less than 2% of the small arms authorized in a Marine division. Many were relegated to rear area roles, guarding prisoners, defending airfields, or patrolling supply depots. Those that did make it to the front were used selectively, in situations that played to their strengths. The weapon's cultural legacy eventually far outgrew its documented battlefield role. This discrepancy between myth and record isn't unique to shotguns. War is fertile ground for legend-making. Some weapons become larger than life, not because they changed history, but because they captured imaginations. The Pacific shotgun story is a perfect example. It was present, yes. It was occasionally devastating, undeniably. But it was not the decisive, omnipresent force that post-war mythology suggests. As the Pacific War moved toward its climax, the battlefields themselves transformed. The dense jungles that had defined early campaigns gave way to cities, volcanic islands, and fortified defensive networks. These environments, harsh, complex, and deadly, demanded different tactics. Shotguns, once envisioned as close-range jungle weapons, suddenly found themselves operating in urban ruins and hardened bunkers, environments that both magnified and exposed their limitations. In early 1945, the U.S. Sixth Army launched its offensive to retake the Philippine capital of Manila. Unlike earlier campaigns fought in tangled vegetation, Manila presented an urban battlefield of shattered buildings, narrow streets, and fortified Japanese strongpoints. On paper, this looked like a shotgun's ideal stage. House-to-house fighting, point-blank encounters, confined spaces. Military planners requested substantial shotgun allocations, believing their devastating close-range power would be crucial for clearing buildings. Initially, this expectation held some truth. In room-clearing operations, shotgun blasts were terrifyingly effective. A single well-placed shot could neutralize a defender before he could react. Patrols moving through apartment blocks and administrative buildings often assigned a point man with a Winchester to handle sudden encounters at doorways or stairwells. The wide buckshot spread covered blind angles that rifles might miss. But Japanese defenders adapted with ruthless efficiency. They turned entire neighborhoods into death traps, barricading themselves in interlinked strongpoints, setting up kill zones that prevented American forces from approaching within effective shotgun range. Concrete structures and improvised fortifications blunted the weapon's power. As combat dragged on, flamethrowers and explosives became the tools of choice for breaking stubborn positions. Shotguns proved useful in fleeting moments of surprise, but were rarely decisive in prolonged engagements. The battle for Manila demonstrated both the potential and fragility of the shotgun's tactical niche. It could dominate a hallway. It could not breach a bunker. By February 1945, when the Marines stormed the black sands of Iwo Jima, the war had moved far beyond its jungle origins. The island's terrain, volcanic ash, steep ridges, and underground tunnel systems offered almost none of the shotgun's ideal conditions. 3 Marine divisions landed, with nearly 1,000 shotguns authorized among them. Yet, their impact was minimal. Japanese defenses on Iwo Jima were not designed for infiltration attacks. They were designed for attrition, turning the island into a giant fortress. Machine guns, mortars, and artillery were positioned to cover every approach. Tunnels allowed defenders to appear, strike, and vanish. Marines relied on combined arms tactics, rifles, automatic weapons, flamethrowers, demolition charges, and tank support to root out entrenched defenders. Shotguns simply didn't have the range, penetration, or logistical priority to shape the fight. Adding to the problem was ammunition. Although the all-brass M19 12-gauge shell had been officially adopted in March 1945, the timing was too late for Iwo Jima. Marines still struggled with swollen paper shells in the island's damp conditions, leading to misfeeds and jams. The weapon that had once seemed tailor-made for Pacific warfare found itself ill-suited to one of the war's most brutal battles. 2 months later, the Battle of Okinawa began. A massive, grinding confrontation fought between April and June 1945. This was the final and bloodiest major Pacific battle. Unlike earlier island assaults, the Japanese 32nd Army employed a defense-in-depth strategy, retreating to fortified inland positions rather than launching mass banzai charges. The battle unfolded across open terrain, fortified ridges, and cave complexes. By now, shotguns were finally being supplied with reliable brass ammunition. The 1st and 6th Marine Divisions had hundreds available, theoretically in their most reliable form of the war. But the battlefield conditions limited their role. Japanese defenses on the Shuri Line kept engagements at extended ranges. Artillery, tanks, and flamethrower teams became the key instruments of assault. Shotguns only came into play during the final clearing of captured positions, when Marines swept caves and bunkers for surviving defenders. Shotguns also served non-frontline but essential functions at Okinawa. Military police units used them for controlling the vast movements of civilians displaced by the fighting. Guard detachments relied on them for security in rear areas. Their tactical niche had shifted: less frontline dominance, more specialized, controlled use. By the war's final year, the shotgun's trajectory was clear. It remained a niche tool, valuable under the right circumstances, but overshadowed by more versatile and decisive weapons. Urban combat in Manila revealed both its strengths in confined spaces and its vulnerabilities against entrenched defenses. Iwo Jima showed its near irrelevance against fortified terrain and logistical constraints. Okinawa demonstrated that even when reliability issues were solved, tactical doctrine and terrain could relegate it to secondary roles. Yet even in these diminished capacities, the shotgun persisted, not because it was glamorous or decisive, but because war finds uses for every tool. A weapon that could deliver instant, overwhelming force at close range would always have its place, even if that place was smaller than mythology would later suggest. The United States fought the Pacific War not only with firepower, but with industrial weight. Behind every rifleman, every flamethrower burst, every artillery barrage stood a colossal manufacturing machine that dwarfed Japan's capabilities. Shotguns were a small but revealing part of this industrial story. Their production numbers were impressive, their authorized allocations significant, but the logistical realities of war tell a more complicated tale. During World War II, American manufacturers produced military shotguns on a massive scale. Winchester led the effort, building approximately 25,000 Model 1897 BIDI, and between 60,000 and 80,000 Model 12S for the armed forces. Remington, Stevens, and Ithaca added several thousand more of their own designs, including the Remington Model 11 semi-auto and the Stevens 500/2620 pump actions. By 1945, well over 100,000 shotguns had entered U.S. military service. These numbers at first glance suggest widespread frontline use, but numbers alone are deceptive. The U.S. military's logistical system stretched across thousands of miles of ocean, from American factories to Pacific beaches. Not every shotgun produced was destined for a Marine patrol in the jungle. The official Marine Corps table of organization authorized 306 shotguns per division, beginning in 1943. That sips a meaningful figure, but still represented less than 2% of a division, SEP's total small arms. These weapons were allocated with deliberate specialization. Military police companies received many for prisoner management and security duties. Pioneer battalions used them for engineering support, perimeter defense, and guarding critical positions. Select rifle squads were assigned shotguns, primarily for jungle patrols and close-quarters defense. This distribution ensured that shotguns were present in every major Marine operation, but not abundant. The typical rifle company might have only a handful, and whether those few shotguns actually saw combat depended on terrain, tactical plans, and individual commanders' preferences. If production numbers explain availability, ammunition explains practicality. A 12-gauge shell was twice as heavy and 3 times as bulky as a standard .30 caliber rifle round. A Marine could carry roughly 80 rifle cartridges in the same space and weight as 36 shotgun shells. On a cramped landing craft or during grueling patrols, this difference mattered enormously. Logistical officers had to make brutal calculations. Landing operations, prioritized rifle and machine gun ammunition, mortar shells, medical supplies, and food. Shotgun ammunition was lower on the priority list. Even when shotguns arrived in theater, units often received limited shell allocations, sometimes just a few boxes per operation. Marines quickly learned to conserve their ammunition using shotguns for short, intense bursts rather than sustained firefights. The Pacific Ocean itself was a logistical adversary. Shipping space was finite, and every crate had to earn its keep. Rifles and machine guns were versatile, essential across all terrain types. Shotguns were niche weapons, valuable in specific conditions, but far less adaptable. As a result, many shotguns stayed in rear area storage, used for guard duty at airfields, docks, or supply depots, rather than being shipped to frontline combat zones. Even within combat areas, distribution was uneven. Some divisions integrated shotguns effectively into patrol tactics. Others considered them logistical dead weight. If a weapon required special ammunition and offered limited versatility, it might simply be left behind in favor of the more flexible M1 Garand or Thompson submachine gun. Administrative and armorer reports provide further clues. Rifle and machine gun parts flooded supply chains, reflecting their constant use and wear in combat. By contrast, shotgun repair requests were rare. Many units reported that their shotguns spent more time being cleaned for storage corrosion than undergoing combat repairs. Ammunition requisition records tell the same story. Divisions requested millions of rifle rounds and hundreds of thousands of machine gun belts, but relatively modest quantities of shotgun shells, often earmarked for training or security roles rather than combat expenditure. These patterns reveal a disconnect between production and actual battlefield presence. The U.S. could produce shotguns by the tens of thousands, but employing them effectively required tactical doctrine, reliable ammunition, transportation capacity, and sustained frontline integration. In many cases, those factors never aligned. The shotgun story is a small but telling illustration of a larger truth. Industrial capacity alone doesn't guarantee battlefield impact. America's factories could build more weapons than Japan could ever hope to match, but not every weapon found its optimal role in the vast, varied Pacific theater. Rifles and machine guns formed the backbone of infantry combat. Mortars and artillery shaped the battlefield from a distance. Flamethrowers carved paths through caves and bunkers. Shotguns, meanwhile, occupied a narrow band of tactical circumstances, devastating when used appropriately, but often overshadowed by more versatile systems. Production figures reflected potential, logistical realities dictated actual use. By the end of the war, thousands of shotguns were never fired in anger, sitting in storage or serving in guard towers far from the front lines. Others saw brief, intense moments of action, point men firing into jungle ambushes, sentries halting night infiltrators, squads clearing rooms in Manila. These moments were real, impactful on a small scale, but they never matched the sweeping mythos that post-war culture would later create. To fully understand the role of American shotguns in the Pacific, it's helpful to step back and place them within a global wartime context. The United States was not the only power fighting in jungles, cities, and close quarters during World War II. Other nations faced similar tactical challenges, but their solutions were often different. Examining how Britain, Australia, the Soviet Union, and China approached close-range combat reveals just how unique America's shotgun story was and how non-essential the weapon ultimately proved to be. British and Australian troops fought in some of the same jungles as the U.S. Marines, particularly in New Guinea, Burma, and Malaya. These were humid, close-range environments, seemingly ideal for shotgun tactics. Yet, neither army adopted the shotgun as a standard combat tool. The British military had experimented with shotguns earlier, during World War I, but by the time the Pacific conflict escalated, their tactical thinking had shifted. For close-range firepower, they relied on submachine guns, most notably the Sten and Thompson. These weapons offered higher magazine capacities, rapid fire, and compatibility with existing ammunition logistics, making them easier to integrate into infantry doctrine. Australian forces, who bore the brunt of jungle warfare in New Guinea before American reinforcements arrived, followed similar patterns. Jungle patrols typically carried a mix of Lee Enfield rifles and Owen submachine guns. The Owen, in particular, was beloved by Australian troops for its reliability in wet conditions and its controllable automatic fire. A burst from an Owen could sweep a jungle path just as effectively as a shotgun blast, but with greater sustained fire and without specialized ammunition. It wasn't that Britain and Australia were unaware of shotguns. They simply didn't see them as worth the logistical and doctrinal investment. Their combat effectiveness in the Pacific theater remained high, proving that jungle warfare could be fought successfully without mass shotgun deployment. The Soviet Union fought some of the most intense close-quarters battles of the entire war, from the urban hell of Stalingrad to the forests and fields of Eastern Europe. If any army might have benefited from shotguns, it was the Red Army. Yet Soviet forces never adopted combat shotguns on any meaningful scale. This decision stemmed from both doctrine and practicality. The Soviet approach to infantry combat emphasized volume of fire and simplicity of supply. Standardization around the Mosin, Nagant rifle, PPS-41 submachine gun, and later the PPS kept logistics streamlined for their enormous conscript armies. Shotguns, requiring specialized ammunition and offering no clear advantage over existing weapons, did not fit this model. In urban warfare, Soviet troops preferred submachine guns and grenades for room clearing. In forests, massed rifle fire and light machine guns dominated engagements. Their operational research and battlefield experience simply didn't justify adding shotguns to the mix, despite the close-range nature of much Soviet combat. China's war against Japan involved some of the most brutal close-quarters fighting of the entire conflict. Vast numbers of Chinese troops engaged Japanese forces in villages, hills, and urban centers, often under conditions of severe equipment shortages. If any army might have embraced shotguns as a low-tech equalizer, it was China. And indeed, some shotguns were used, particularly civilian hunting weapons adapted for militia units or local defense forces. But on the whole, the National Revolutionary Army relied on whatever rifles and light machine guns they could acquire, often a chaotic mix of Mausers, Springfields, and locally produced copies. Ammunition supply was unreliable and fragmented. In this environment, the logistical simplicity of standard rifle calibers outweighed the niche advantages of shotguns. They were simply too difficult to supply and sustain in the numbers needed for meaningful impact. What unites Britain, Australia, the Soviet Union, and China is not shared weaponry, but shared pragmatism. Each army made tactical and logistical decisions based on their circumstances, resources, and doctrines. None of them considered shotguns essential for success in close-range combat. Instead, they relied on rifles, submachine guns, grenades, and machine guns, weapons that could be mass-produced, standardized, and easily supported in the field. The American experience, therefore, was not universal but distinctive. The U.S. had the industrial capacity to produce tens of thousands of shotguns, the logistical power to ship them overseas, and the doctrinal flexibility to experiment with their tactical use. Yet even with those advantages, shotguns remained peripheral, never replacing more versatile infantry weapons. This broader perspective underscores a key point. Shotguns were a tactical option, not a necessity. Other armies achieved comparable or superior results in similar environments without them. Their absence from British, Australian, Soviet, and Chinese arsenals didn't cripple combat effectiveness. It simply reflected different, often more efficient solutions to the same battlefield problems. Ultimately, the shotgun occupied a unique American niche, a blend of cultural familiarity as hunting tools, industrial capability, and tactical experimentation. In no other major military of the war did the shotgun receive such formal attention, production, and doctrinal integration. And yet, even in the U.S. case, it remained a specialist weapon, never ascending to the central role imagined in post-war myths. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the United States military began a massive review of its wartime arsenal. Across every branch, analysts sifted through operational reports, maintenance logs, and battlefield data to determine which weapons had truly earned their place and which had merely filled temporary gaps. Rifles, machine guns, mortars, and artillery received detailed scrutiny, as these had formed the backbone of victory. Shotguns, too, came under the microscope, but their evaluation revealed a story of potential never fully realized. Post-war, the U.S. Army's Infantry Board conducted extensive studies on small arms effectiveness to inform future procurement. They examined the M1 Garand's reliability, the BAR's squad role, and the utility of submachine guns in both urban and open terrain. When it came to shotguns, the conclusion was clear and unsentimental. They were useful, but not essential. The shotgun's advantages, devastating close-range power and simple operation, were acknowledged, but these were offset by limitations: low ammunition capacity, heavy and bulky shells, poor range, and the lack of integration into combined arms tactics. In an era increasingly defined by mechanization and mobility, the shotgun simply didn't fit the evolving battlefield paradigm. The Infantry Board recommended minimal future investment in combat shotguns. Unlike the Garand or Browning automatic rifle, which were earmarked for continued service and modernization, shotguns were largely relegated to police, guard, and training functions. The conclusions were pragmatic, reflecting hard lessons from the Pacific. Shotguns had their moments, but they were not decisive weapons of war. 5 years after World War II, the Korean Peninsula erupted into conflict. The Korean War, fought from 1950 to 1953, brought American forces back into rugged terrain and often brutal close-range combat. Hills, forests, and urban centers like Seoul created environments where, in theory, shotguns might have regained tactical relevance. And yet, they didn't. Frontline units in Korea overwhelmingly relied on May-1 Garands, bars, carbines, and automatic weapons. The official presence of shotguns was minimal, and their actual use even rarer. A few were employed for guard duties or limited close-quarter roles, but they played no significant role in tactical doctrine. The weapon that had once been imagined as a key tool for jungle fighting in the Pacific simply faded into the background. Why? Several reasons converged. First, firepower expectations had evolved. The Korean War battlefield favored rapid, sustained fire, and flexible squad tactics. The Garand's semi-automatic action gave riflemen more reach and volume than any shotgun could. Second, logistics and ammunition standardization remained paramount. Supplying 12-gauge shells for a handful of shotguns was inefficient compared to feeding standardized rifle and machine gun calibers. Finally, terrain and enemy tactics differed. While Korea featured close-range fighting, it also included engagements at longer distances, often across valleys or ridgelines. These were conditions where shotguns offered little advantage. The brutal winters also complicated shotgun maintenance, as moisture and freezing temperatures affected ammunition reliability. Though sidelined in frontline combat, shotguns didn't disappear entirely. Their non-combat roles persisted. Military police units used them for prisoner control, airbase security, and convoy protection. Training installations employed them for guard duties and familiarization. In these contexts, the shotgun remained a reliable, intimidating, and easy-to-use tool. But these were support roles, far from the mythic frontline image forged in popular memory. The Korean War thus confirmed what post-war studies had already concluded. The shotgun was a niche weapon, valuable in specific circumstances, but unsuited to the mainstream demands of mid-20th century warfare. The focus of military innovation shifted toward automatic rifles, improved machine guns, and new anti-armor technologies, leaving the shotgun behind as something of an anachronism. By the early 1950s, American military doctrine increasingly emphasized combined arms, mobility, and fire superiority. Infantry units were expected to integrate seamlessly with artillery, armor, and air support. Small arms development focused on improving range, reliability, and sustained fire, not short-range shock power. Shotguns simply didn't align with these priorities. Their strengths, so situational during the Pacific campaigns, were ill-suited to the Cold War battlefield. In the shadow of nuclear weapons, jet aircraft, and mechanized divisions, the humble pump-action shotgun seemed like a relic from another era. Procurement reflected this doctrinal shift. New shotgun models were purchased in small numbers, mainly for security and training purposes, not for mass frontline deployment. The Marine Corps, which had once championed the shotgun in the Pacific, followed this broader trend, focusing instead on modernizing its rifle and machine gun inventory. The shotgun's post-war decline wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, gradual, and practical. There was no scandal, no decisive failure. Instead, as tactics, technology, and doctrine evolved, the shotgun simply lost its place at the center of military innovation. It lingered in armories, guard towers, and training ranges, waiting for rare moments when its unique capabilities were needed. Ironically, the very characteristics that had made it iconic in the public imagination, its simplicity, close-range lethality, and cinematic presence were the same factors that limited its relevance in a rapidly modernizing military. The Korean War marked the first major conflict where the shotgun was technically available but tactically irrelevant. 2 decades after the Pacific War, the jungles of Southeast Asia once again pulled American forces into brutal close-quarters combat. In Vietnam, thick foliage, hidden trails, and sudden ambushes recreated many of the tactical conditions Marines had faced on Guadalcanal. And with them came a familiar weapon, the combat shotgun. By the mid-1960s, shotguns were reissued in significant numbers. Remington 870s, Winchester 1200s, and modified Stevens pump actions. U.S. advisors and special forces used them first, valuing their raw stopping power in dense jungle fighting and night ambush defense. Infantry units followed, particularly in point man roles, perimeter security, and tunnel clearing. The weapon's niche strengths resurfaced almost unchanged from WWU, devastating at short range, psychologically intimidating, and mechanically simple. But the limitations also returned. Heavy, bulky ammunition and low magazine capacity meant shotguns remained specialist tools rather than standard infantry weapons. Helicopter-borne mobility and automatic rifles, like the M16, defined Vietnam's tactical landscape. The shotgun was a tool for specific moments, not the centerpiece of combat doctrine. When those moments came, close-range ambushes, jungle paths, surprise night contacts, the shotgun proved just as lethal as ever. As the war ended, so did the shotgun's brief comeback. Advances in assault rifle design, grenade launchers, and body armor steadily reduced the shotgun's tactical niche. It survived mainly in special operations, riot control, and law enforcement, not as a frontline battlefield star. Across 3 decades, from the humid jungles of Guadalcanal to the urban ruins of Manila, from the volcanic hell of Iwo Jima to the steaming forests of Vietnam, the combat shotgun carved out a story unlike any other weapon of the 20th century. It was never decisive, rarely dominant, and often sidelined by doctrine, logistics, or terrain. And yet, it endured. Its legacy isn't measured in sweeping strategic victories, but in moments, a Marine point man snapping off a slam-fire burst in the dark. A sentry halting an infiltration with a single blast. A patrol surviving an ambush because of a few well-placed shells. The shotgun was not the king of the battlefield, but it was a reliable, fearsome ally when used at the right time in the right place. History turned it into a myth. Popular culture elevated it into legend. The archives reveal a humbler, more human story, a weapon born of practicality, shaped by environment, and remembered for its visceral impact. Not a war winner, but unforgettable.